Hello, a tribute to the late, great Percy Press Senior, last of the original Punch and Judy buskers. Prologue. When I was a kid at junior school, I found a book. It was a picture and word book written by a man called Panto Puck, who was a puppeteer between the wars. And it was a beautifully illustrated book. I think he did the illustrations himself. And he told the story of how he was pushing a handcart and touring around the villages and small hamlets of the day uh, with his puppet show and living outdoors with a tent and a primus and all the rest of it. And the premise of the story was that he would be talking to the puppets as he pushed the cart around. I thought it was a lovely story, full of whimsy. I didn't realise that that sort of thing actually happened. In fact, later on, I found a book by a man called Neville Wiltshire called The Peep Show, where he did exactly the same thing. I think he was a school teacher, and during the summer holidays, he would, in the West Country, travel round with a handcart between the villages and hamlets, doing exactly the same thing. Not a Punch and Judy show, but a puppet show, and entertaining when there was very little radio and absolutely no television. It was a different world. And Roy Hudd made a two-part programme, dramatic programme, where he played Neville Wiltshire and recaptured those in between the war years that will never come back. So let's get on to Percy Press Senior. Well, I knew Percy when I was a kid because my dad, Billy Martin, worked with Percy just after the war in pantomime. In those days, they'd usually have, if it's Cinderella, there'd be a Baron Hardup scene where there'd be entertainment in the hall and they'd bring on a special act. And in this case, it was Percy, not doing Punch and Judy, but doing his stand-up magic, cups and balls and other bits, which I'll tell you about in a moment. And they struck up a friendship because they were both, in those days, Dad was just beginning to do Punch and Judy, and Percy was helping him out a little bit. And two things I remember about Percy's show, Punch and Judy. First, it's quite a lot of gear to carry, and a lot of people had cricket bags and bits and pieces. But Percy, he was very clever. He got a golf bag and a golf trolley, and he put all the stuff into the trolley so he could wheel it in and out of wherever he was working later on when he was doing private parties and venues. And that was a great idea and something that I did use. Bless him. Saved me a lot of bad back injuries. And the other thing was, it was the first time I'd ever seen a cabaret booth. Now, for those of you, especially over the head hand punch workers, know that the standard punch booth, which is great for outdoors, can be a little bit top heavy, especially in modern houses where ceilings are quite a bit lower. So a cabaret booth is virtually, the top is cut off. So although you're working above with your hands above your head, you haven't got a large top, a proscenium as it were. You can still have a backcloth on which the puppets can show up nicely, but that was part two. Part three, of course, was the Punch and Judy show itself, which was fantastic. But Percy, in his early formative years, did quite a lot of busking in London. Every theatre queue had a busker outside, and you had to go in, work fast, hit them quick, grab the money and run because the queue was diminishing as you were working. People were going into the theatres. So Percy learned to deliver fast and hit them hard. And he and his mate decided that they'd go down to Brighton for the summer. And they did it with a handcart. They walked from London to Brighton. I think it took them about 3 days, camping out overnight under the stars. And that's when he told me a lovely story. He said on their second night, they were well into the country then, past Gatwick. There was no airport, of course, or none to speak of. And it was really quite rural. And they were sitting there, and suddenly they noticed all the bushes were glowing, little lights. And his mate said, God, Percy, it's the fairies. It's the fairies. He said, don't be stupid. And they looked, and I'm not sure if it was glow worms or glow flies, things that you just don't see anymore. That was a little memory of his. and of course they got down to Brighton and did the biz. Now, Punch and Judy for Percy was something special. Um, his figures were pretty standard, but the routines he had. Now, for those of you who know about Punch and Judy, it came over in, I think, the 16th or 17th century as Puccinello from Italy, which was a marionette show. And Pepys' Diary mentions Punch and Judy in those days before the fire of London. And he developed into Mr. Punch and became a hand puppet show. And it was for adults, not for children, quite contemporary. So that's why you had characters like the Hangman, because in those days there was a hangman, a notorious hangman called Jack Ketch, who would be drunk and bodge the hangings quite badly, because these were public hangings in those days. You know, they had a strange view on public entertainment. You know, hanging, Glasgow Empire, things like that, very similar. So it then developed more in the children's line. So when Peter Pan came out, J.M. Barrie, that's when the crocodile was introduced into the show. Where the sausages came from, who knows? But Percy, the one memorable thing about Percy is that the show was for kids, but there'll be enough in there to entertain the adults. And he did a boxing match, which was fabulous. He had these two very hard-headed wooden boxers and thick leather padded gloves. So when they went at it, you could thump, 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 thump. It was quite a sight to behold. And the bell would ring, and they go back to their corners. And what Percy would do, the two characters, the boxers, would flop onto the under the proscenium arch, and they'd be breathing up and down. It was hilarious. Very, very good. Now, his busking act, well, he learned the hard way. You know, as I say, he did the cups and balls, nothing particularly special, apart from, instead of palming the balls, he'd hold them against his body like that, with his hands open. So the ball would be hidden, and he'd cop it and do bits like that. But he didn't call them the balls, he called them liverpills. And I think it was the then Prince of Wales, which would be 2 generations before our now King, Prince Charles. And they'd be the Prince's liverpills. And he did the whole rigmarole against that. And it was a beautiful thing to watch. And he'd do the card underfoot, where, you know, you take the 7 of diamonds, give it to a person, take the 9 of diamonds or 9 of spades and put it under your shoe, and they'd swap places. Again, a pretty standard trick, but in Percy's hands, wonderful. And he'd do a glass of water production, or a glass of liquid production, from his pocket, which was a masterclass in misdirection. You never saw it coming. And I remember at the Magic Circle, I described the Magic Circle having their club room, and he busked in the club room one night just to show people what it was all about. And we were encouraged to throw money down, because he was donating it to a charity of his choice. And I remember Ken Brooke, who knew Percy very well, walking round, reaching in his pocket for handfuls of then 50p pieces, 10 bob in the old days, which was a lot of money. The average wage was about 20 quid a week, and he'd be throwing these in the air to land on Percy, on the floor around Percy. But he made sure everybody saw what he was doing, so he was advertising himself while supporting a charity. That was the Norther in Kenbrook. And all my memories of Percy are great and good. And his son, who was much taller than Percy, carried on the reins. But there was only one Percy Press Senior. Talking of Punch and Judy, of course, Tony Hancock, his second film was The Punch and Judy Man. His first film, The Rebel, which did very well in England but flopped terribly in America, because some clever clogs decided to call it I, Genius, and which got right up the Americans' nose. So Tony was hoping to come back with a really good international film. So what did he choose? Punch and Judy. Goodness knows why, because it was a totally English tradition. And he surrounded himself with all his friends, Hugh Lloyd and John Le Mesurier and Hattie Jakes, and Sylvia Sims played his nagging wife. And I remember 2 things about the film. The opening sequence, which was about 10 minutes, done almost without speech. On the back, he'd be getting getting up in the morning and having breakfast, and Housewife's Choice would be going on, and Tony would be reacting to, oh, this is for Mrs. So and So, and he'd pull his faces and all the bits and pieces. Then his wife would nag at him, and he'd just do all the mug shots. And on the way out of her shop, because they lived above her pottery shop, he picked up a money box, a pig money box. You remember those? And a bunch of daffodils, and the stopper where you got the money out was in the pig's bottom, and he wrenched it open and shoved the flowers up the pig's bum, and that was the end of that sequence. And they had to have the pig specially made, because anybody who's ever had a pig's money box knows the stopper's always in the tummy. So that gag cost a lot of money. And the Punch and Judy advisor was Wal Kent, I believe, on that film, and he must have worked a lot with Tony, because there's one conversation where Tony Hancock, the Punch and Judy man, is talking to his assistant Hugh Lloyd, and he's talking about breaking a new swazzle. You know, oh, what's it like? Oh, it's a little bit squeaky. I've not quite got it right, and only a Punch and Judy man would know that, an actor. So he had to have Wal Kent's support there, and of course. Tony knew when he was making the film that it wasn't going to be the big comeback that he anticipated, even though the characters, John Le Mesurier played the Sandman, you know, the man who made sand sculptures on the beach, and he'd be doing the lecture, and he'd always be shooing off dogs in case they peed on the sand and washed a bit away. Beautifully studied little pieces, but nothing that was going to make him an international star again. And so Tony got a sense of doom, and he blamed it all on the character of Mr. Punch. He had to blame somebody, he couldn't blame himself, so he blamed Mr. Punch. I mean, I've never heard of a puppeteer blaming his puppets for a bad performance, but that's what Tony did. So for all you Punch and Judy men out there, you know, keep the swazzle damp and don't swallow it. And Percy Press Senior, one of the best. Thank you for watching. See you again soon. And TTFN. Next time, I'll be telling you about the rise and the decline of vaudeville. Or should I say variety? That's our English way of saying it. The rise and fall of variety and what took its place. Till then, TTFN, that's ta-ta for now, and be happy, live long and prosper. Bye for now.